to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. Join us weekly for tales of cursed media, haunted web series, ARGs, creepypastas, unfiction, and all things horror. Sit back, dim the lights, and welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave. Welcome back, my friends. Come with me to the happy haunts once again in the French Quarter of New Orleans, specifically at Chartres House Cafe, a place I was drawn to for many of years living down here. I've eaten there many a times, and there's always that feeling of someone watching you, someone with you that isn't there. However, a positive experience. This isn't a mention of perhaps duress that some might feel when spirits are around. This is completely passion and nothing but the utmost respect and caregiving of spirits. The building at 540 Chartres is known as the Cali House, and is haunted by the ghost of Miss Dearling, who died there in the mid-19th century. Her ghost has been speaking through the second floor window at night. The servants' quarters of the Cali House were used as quarantine room for slaves during the yellow fever epidemic. The ghosts of the children still occupy the building, and often reach out and grab onto tourists who walk through the area. There's also the ghost of a man who committed suicide in a building across the street, who can be seen eerily staring through the windows of his old apartment. The Great Fire of 1788. In 1788, a fire exploded throughout the city of New Orleans. The French Quarter was decimated. Over 800 of the 1,100 buildings standing in the city at the time were completely destroyed. That's over 3/4 of the city. Hundreds of people died. New Orleans was in ruin. At the time, New Orleans was under Spanish rule, and Governor Esteban Miro set up tents for those who were rendered homeless. Famous landmarks like the St. Louis Cathedral, the old Absinthe House, and Meridy's Mansion, which is now Muriel's Restaurant. Fantastic restaurant, might I add. No hat allowed inside, but check out the bathrooms if you just go in to get a drink or a meal, whichever you prefer. It's beautiful veves in the bathroom. But these buildings were all either destroyed or took serious damage. The city jail was also destroyed, and the local government did nothing about the prisoners who were locked up inside. They all perished in the fire. The fire began in the house of Army Treasurer Don Vincent Jose Nunes. When a candle was knocked over, rumors has it that Don Nunes lived on 540 Chartres Street, the exact location of the Chartres House Cafe. Catty corner from its original location. Right now, the Chartres 540 Chartres is a chicken shop. Although I have not been inside of it, I do want to go back to visit the courtyard. as the spirits danced. The Louis Galley. After the fire, the lot was brought out by the Major Louis Galley. He rebuilt the lot, building that is now known as the Galley House, also known as the Kuffers Building on 540 Chartres Street. Major Galley was known as the founder of the Bataillon d'Artillerie, or the Artillery Bennington in English. This was the first battalion that General Zachary Taylor called for backup when the Mexican-American War broke out in 1846. Galley erected the building at 540 Chartres for which has become purposes. The lower floor of the building was meant for business use. The upper floors were residential. There were also spaces in the rear for the kitchen and the servants' quarters. The rear spaces was connected to the buildings by a series of catwalks. Galley built in the space his most fashionable shopping district of the French Quarter at the time, meaning that he probably got a good return on the investment. Upon Louis Galley's death, it was revealed in the New Orleans Times-Picayune that he may have been a soldier of Napoleon while in his 20s. The Dearling family on Chartres Street during the 1890s. At the time, Henry Dearling ran a tailor shop at 540 Chartres Street. On the first floor of the Galley House, there were a normal, remarkable couple living in the New Orleans. Nothing strange going on about the couple, but when they passed away, there were some unusual instances in how their deaths were reported. Johanna Dearling was reported dead in 1895 at just 24 years old. Her husband, Mr. Dearling, was reported to have died a short while later, while Miss Dearing's death was that of a known cause. Mr. Dearling was said to have died of a heat stroke while working in his shop. Weirdly enough, some newspapers report that Miss Dearling actually didn't die until many years later, when she was about 60 years old. And to this day, the mystery of Johanna Dearing's death remains unsolved, but her ghost is said to roam around the vicinity of 540 Chartres Street. The Reynes mansion existed for several decades before the 1788 fire. Standing on the corner of Chartres and Toulouse, right across from 540 Chartres Street, Arnaud Richaud was the first tenant and may have still lived there during the Great Fire of 1788. The building was said to have been completely destroyed in the fire. A man named Joseph Reynes bought the house shortly after and rebuilt. Now known as the Reynes House, Joseph Reynes was a New Orleans socialite, an influential person in the city. Came from a wealthy Creole family and served as Secretary of General Counsel, the director of the Louisiana State Bank. The Reynes mansion again took damage in the Great Fire of 1794, and Reynes built the house back up again a year later. A man named Victor Valentine opened a cafe on the first floor of Reynes mansion, which became an iconic New Orleans cafe. According to noble guests like Tennessee Williams, Victor's Cafe remained open until 1962. A new tenant occupied the building, which had become known as the Stage Door, a popular bar at the time. But in 2004, the building has been renovated, and the Chartres House Cafe moved in. The The Chartres House Cafe opened in 2004 in the building known as Ryan's Mansion. They were a huge success, serving classic Creole and Cajun dishes like jambalaya, blackened shrimp, and oysters supreme. But a few years later, they realized that they were quickly expanding and were going to need more space. They decided to move across the intersection at 540 Chartres Street, known as the Galley House. The Galley House provided the Chartres House Cafe with the kitchen and dining space they needed to fully thrive as a restaurant. Today, the Chartres House Cafe is touted as one of the best restaurants in New Orleans. Locals say that the specialty in the crawfish, they serve the crawfish cakes, crawfish pasta, crawfish tails, and a spanking etouffee. They also serve beers and fantastic Bloody Marys. The Chartres House Cafe occupies a building, or better yet, an intersection with a lot of history. The corner of Chartres and Toulouse are stained with blood and the memories of souls who made New Orleans. While many go for the shrimp and crawfish, paranormal enthusiasts show up for the ghost. The most famous spirit of the Chartres House is that of a strange figure dressed in 1970s clothing. Nobody seems to know who exactly the man is. According to some stories, he's the ghost of a man who committed suicide in the Ryan's Mansion in the 1970s, when it was being used as an apartment building. He's been seen standing at the windows of the Ryan's house, or at the intersection of Chartres and Toulouse, giving passerbys blank stares and generally giving people the creeps. Others who have entered the rear building of the Chartres House have reported some especially creepy phenomena. The so-called former servants' quarters were actually used to house slaves and their children in quarantine during the yellow fever epidemic. The children of the slaves still live on the building. Many report seeing their tiny hands of the children reach out and touch them, often clinging onto their clothing. Passerby who dare reach to the barred windows have felt the children grab onto their hands, which has put the fear of God into quite a few tourists. Some who have reported the sounds of people crying and sobbing emanating from the servants' quarters. The ghost of Johanna Dearling is also said to haunt the Chartres House. Miss Dearling was said to have died of unknown causes. Some newspapers reported her dead at 24, and others at 66 years of age. Those who have seen the ghost report recall seeing a lady standing at the second floor window of the Chartres House, indicating that she may have died at 24, although nobody knows if the ghost is actually that of Johanna Dearling. I would like to thank NewOrleansGhost.com for information on this special episode of the Chartres House Cafe. I would like to thank the Chartres House, as well as Toulouse Street, Jefferson Parish Library. And I appreciate you all listening to this fine ghost story this evening. Once again, I am your host, Ryan Mckern. And until we meet again, au revoir.